The warning lights on the monitoring station flashed red for the first time in 3 years. Communications Officer Zethkari jerked his four-eyed head up from his reading tablet, his blue skin turning pale. The automatic systems were screaming about an incoming transmission from the Forbidden Zone. Zethkari's long fingers danced across the control panel. His species, the Veltar, were known throughout the galaxy for their peaceful nature and excellent hearing. Right now, he wished he could turn off both traits. The signal coming through his speakers was unlike anything in the Federation database. The transmission was rough and filled with static. Behind the interference, Zethkari could hear a voice speaking in harsh, clipped tones. The universal translator struggled with the language, spitting out broken phrases. Emergency. Life support failing. Need immediate assistance. Coordinates follow. Station Commander Yarlvin rushed to Zethkari's workstation. The tall, thin Etherian moved with the grace his species was famous for, but his usually calm face showed worry. "What sector is that coming from?" he asked, his melodic voice tight with concern. Zethkari checked his readings twice before answering. "Quarantine Zone 7, Commander." "The signal is coming from the third planet of system designation Terrasol." The commander's face went completely white. Every Federation citizen knew about the quarantine zones. They were sectors of space marked as too dangerous for contact. Zone 7 contained what the scientists called a Class 3 death world, a planet so violent and harsh that any species evolving there would be too dangerous to approach. "Sir," Zethkari said quietly, "protocol states that any distress signal triggers automatic humanitarian response. 3 ships are already moving toward the signal source." Commander Yarlvin felt his stomach drop. The Federation's emergency protocols were built into every ship's computer system. When a distress call was received, nearby vessels had to respond. It was the most sacred law of galactic civilization, but no one had ever considered what would happen if the call came from a quarantine zone. On his screen, Yarlvin watched 3 green dots moving toward the red marker that showed the signal's origin. The diplomatic cruiser Harmony's Dawn was closest, followed by the science vessel Peaceful Inquiry and the patrol ship Gentle Current. All 3 were peaceful ships with minimal weapons. They were built for exploration and diplomacy, not for dealing with unknown dangers. "Can we recall them?" the commander asked, though he already knew the answer. "No, sir. Their AIs have classified this as a Priority 1 humanitarian emergency. They won't respond to recall orders until they've completed the rescue mission." 300 light-years away, Captain Sil Andros of the Harmony's Dawn was having the same conversation with his crew. The elegant Etherian had commanded diplomatic missions for 40 years, but he'd never faced anything like this. "The signal is definitely artificial," reported Science Officer Temral from her station. The young Quellian's tentacles moved nervously as she studied her readings. "The technology is primitive compared to our standards, but it's clearly from an intelligent species." "What do we know about the planet?" Captain Silandros asked. Temral pulled up the file on her screen. Federation survey classified it as uninhabitable. Gravity is 1.3 times standard. Atmosphere is 21% oxygen. That's toxic to most species. Surface temperature varies wildly. Massive storms. Tectonic activity. Radiation from the local star. The survey team called it aggressively hostile to life. Navigator Kellen, a 4-armed Nexari, looked up from his instruments. "Sir, if a species evolved on that planet, they would have to be incredibly tough just to survive. The survey notes mention that any life forms there would likely be aggressive and dangerous." Captain Silandros nodded slowly. The Federation had encountered many species over the centuries, but they had always been peaceful. War was something that happened in history books, not in real life. The idea of meeting a truly dangerous species was terrifying. "Sir," Communications Officer Yellen called out, "we're receiving another transmission from the distress signal." The bridge crew listened as the harsh voice came through their speakers again. The universal translator was working better now, giving them clearer words. "Federation vessels, this is Captain Elena Vasquez of the exploration ship UNSC Endeavor. We've been monitoring your approach. Our life support is critical. We have 300 crew members aboard. Please respond." The voice was strong despite the situation. Captain Silandros noticed that the speaker, this Captain Vasquez, didn't sound afraid. Most beings in a life-threatening emergency would show panic or desperation. This voice was calm and controlled. "Yalin, open a channel," the captain ordered. This is Captain Silandros of the Federation vessel Harmony's Dawn. We have received your distress call and are responding. Please transmit your status and requirements for assistance. The response came back quickly. Captain Silandros, thank you for responding. We've suffered main power failure after collision with debris in this asteroid field. Life support will fail in approximately 6 hours. We need immediate evacuation or repair assistance. Understood. We'll be at your position in 2 hours. Maintain emergency power and prepare for rescue operations. Copy that, Captain. And Captain? Thank you. You're saving 300 lives today. As the transmission ended, Captain Silandros felt a mix of pride and worry. Saving lives was what the Federation was all about. But something about this situation felt wrong. The asteroid field hadn't appeared on their long-range sensors. The disabled ship was in a perfect position to ambush anyone who came to help. And that voice. Captain Vasquez sounded too calm, too controlled for someone facing death. On the science vessel Peaceful Inquiry, Captain Morvan was having similar thoughts. The elderly Veltar had spent his life studying new species, and his scientific mind was asking uncomfortable questions. The debris field is suspicious, he told his crew. It's too perfectly positioned. And look at these readings. Some of those asteroids are showing unusual electromagnetic signatures. His first officer, a young Etherian named Silanos, checked the sensor data. You think it's some kind of trap? I think, Captain Morvan said slowly, that we're about to meet a species that thinks very differently from us. A species that evolved on a world where everything tries to kill you would learn to be creative in their survival methods. The third ship, the patrol vessel Gentle Current, was the smallest of the 3 Federation ships. Captain Zarek had only a crew of 50, and his ship carried light defensive weapons. As they approached the asteroid field, his tactical officer reported something that made everyone on the bridge nervous. Sir, I'm picking up faint energy readings from multiple asteroids. The patterns are too regular to be natural. Captain Zarek was a practical Nexari who'd spent years patrolling the peaceful borders of Federation space. He'd never encountered real danger, but his military training was telling him that something was very wrong. All ships, he broadcast on the emergency channel. I recommend extreme caution. This situation may not be what it appears. But it was too late. The 3 Federation ships were already committed to their rescue mission. Their AIs wouldn't let them turn back while beings were in danger, and in the asteroid field ahead, Captain Elena Vasquez smiled as she watched the approaching ships on her screen. They're coming in exactly as predicted, she reported to her crew. 3 ships, minimal weapons, standard humanitarian formation. Signal the fleet. Operation First Contact is a go. Around her, what had appeared to be a disabled exploration vessel suddenly came alive with activity. Hidden weapon systems powered up, concealed communication arrays extended, and throughout the asteroid field, dozens of objects that had looked like floating rocks began to move. The 3 Federation ships approached the disabled human vessel with careful precision. Captain Silandros watched his main screen as the UNSC Endeavour grew larger. The ship looked strange compared to Federation designs. All angles and armor plating instead of the smooth curved lines that peaceful species preferred. Sir, called Navigator Kellen, I'm reading massive power fluctuations from their ship. Their reactor must be badly damaged. Captain Silandros nodded. Prepare the rescue shuttles. If their life support fails, we'll need to evacuate 300 beings quickly. On the human ship, Captain Elena Vasquez checked her watch. The Federation vessels were right on schedule. She'd studied their rescue protocols for months, learning how their peaceful nature would work against them. These beings had no idea what they were walking into. Engineering, how are our fake power readings? She asked into her comm unit. Perfect, Captain, came the reply. We're showing critical system failures across the board. They'll never suspect we're at full power. Vasquez smiled. Humans had learned the art of deception from living on a world that constantly tried to kill them. Every predator on Earth used camouflage, misdirection, and ambush tactics. It was only natural that humans would perfect these skills when they reached space. Captain, her tactical officer reported, all ships are in position. The fleet is ready. Around the asteroid field, 47 human warships waited in perfect silence. They'd been here for weeks, preparing for this moment. Each ship was covered in sensor-absorbing materials that made them look exactly like floating rocks. It was technology born from studying Earth's octopi and chameleons, creatures that had mastered the art of hiding in plain sight. The Federation ships moved closer. Captain Silandros opened communications again. Captain Vasquez, we're prepared to begin rescue operations. Can you give us details on your crew's condition? Most of my people are in emergency shelters, Vasquez replied. We've got about 30 injured from the initial collision, but nothing critical. We're more worried about the life support timeline. Understood. We're moving to docking position now. As the Harmony's Dawn approached the human vessel, something unexpected happened. Captain Silandros felt a strange chill run down his spine. His species had evolved excellent instincts for danger, and every one of them was screaming warnings. Captain, whispered Science Officer Temral, something's wrong. The energy readings from this ship don't match what they're telling us. Before Captain Silandros could respond, the universe changed around them. The asteroid field exploded into motion. Dozens of rocks suddenly sprouted weapons and engines, revealing themselves as warships. The space around the 3 Federation vessels filled with military craft that had been hiding in perfect camouflage. Captain Vasquez's voice came over the communication channel, but the tone was completely different now. Gone was the desperate captain begging for rescue. In its place was the calm, professional voice of a military commander. Federation vessels, this is Captain Elena Vasquez of the United Nations Space Command. You are surrounded by 47 warships of the Earth Defense Fleet. Do not attempt to flee or transmit distress signals. This is not an attack, this is a first contact scenario. On the bridge of the Harmony's Dawn, absolute silence fell. Every member of the crew stared at their screens in shock. The asteroids around them had transformed into a fleet of warships unlike anything in Federation records. The ships were massive, bristling with weapons, and positioned with military precision. Captain Silandros found his voice first. This is impossible. You're from a quarantine zone. How do you have space travel? How do you know about the Federation? Vasquez's reply was matter-of-fact. Captain, we've been monitoring Federation communications for 8 months. We know about your civilization, your laws, and your expansion patterns. We also know that Earth is scheduled for observation and evaluation starting next year. We decided to introduce ourselves first. The human ship that had appeared disabled suddenly blazed with lights and power. Its weapon systems came online, showing energy readings that made the Federation ship's defensive systems look like toys. But more terrifying than the weapons was the realization of what this meant. The Deathworld species hadn't just survived their hostile planet. They'd developed technology, space travel, and military tactics. They'd been watching the Federation without being detected. And they just demonstrated that they could lure peaceful ships into perfectly executed ambushes. Sir, whispered Communications Officer Yellen, what do we do? Captain Silandros had no answer. Federation first contact protocols didn't cover this situation. They'd always assumed that any new species would be peaceful, that first meetings would happen through careful diplomatic channels after years of observation. No one had planned for meeting a species that set traps. Captain Vasquez, he said carefully, what are your intentions? We came here to help you. And we appreciate that, Vasquez replied. Your willingness to risk yourselves for strangers shows the kind of character we hope to find in the Federation. But we're not strangers anymore, Captain. We're neighbors. And it's time we had a proper conversation about how we're all going to get along. On the science vessel Peaceful Inquiry, Captain Morvan was studying his sensor readings with growing amazement. The human ship showed technology levels that should have been impossible for a species not part of the Federation. Their weapons were more advanced than anything in the Galactic database. Their ships were built for war in ways that peaceful species couldn't even imagine. How did they develop all this? Science Officer Krenel asked, her voice filled with wonder and fear. They evolved on a death world, Captain Morvan replied slowly. Everything on their planet probably tried to kill them. They learned to fight back, to be stronger, faster, smarter than their enemies. When they reached space, they brought those skills with them. The patrol ship Gentle Current was the smallest vessel in the Federation group, and Captain Zarek was very aware of how outgunned they were. His ship's light weapons would be useless against the human fleet. But something else worried him more than the firepower surrounding them. Sir, his tactical officer reported, their formation is perfect. Look at the positioning. They've got overlapping fields of fire, escape routes blocked, and sensor coverage of the entire area. This isn't just overwhelming force. This is brilliant military strategy. Captain Zarek nodded grimly. The humans hadn't just built bigger guns. They'd learned how to use them with terrifying efficiency. This was what happened when a species that had fought for survival every day of their evolution finally reached the stars. Captain Vasquez's voice came over the communication channel again. Federation captains, I'm going to propose something that's never happened before in your history. I want to come aboard one of your ships for face-to-face negotiations. I'll bring a small honor guard, completely standard for diplomatic meetings. An honor guard? Captain Cilandros asked. 6 Marines, full combat gear. Again, this is standard protocol for us. We don't go anywhere unarmed. The Federation captains exchanged worried glances over their communication channels. The idea of armed beings on their ships was terrifying. Federation vessels didn't even have security departments. There had never been a need for them. Captain Vasquez, Captain Cilandros said slowly, we are not a military organization. Our ships are built for peace, exploration, and scientific research. We have no defenses against armed visitors. Captain, Vasquez replied, and there was something almost gentle in her voice. We're not coming aboard to threaten you. We're coming aboard to talk, but we're humans, and humans don't go anywhere without being prepared for trouble. It's not because we expect problems, it's because we've learned that problems can come whether you expect them or not. The communication channel fell silent as the 3 Federation captains tried to process this. A species that carried weapons not because they wanted to fight, but because they wanted to be ready if fighting became necessary. It was a completely alien way of thinking. Very well, Captain Cilandros finally said. You may come aboard the Harmony's Dawn, but I want your word that you mean no harm to my crew. You have my word, Captain. And more than that, you have my respect. It takes courage to trust strangers, especially when those strangers have you surrounded by warships. As Captain Vasquez prepared to transfer to the Federation vessel, she allowed herself a small smile. Phase 1 of Operation First Contact was complete. The Federation now knew that humans existed, that they were technologically advanced, and that they were not to be underestimated. Phase 2 was going to be much more interesting. The shuttle bay of the Harmony's Dawn had never hosted armed visitors. Captain Cilandros stood with his senior staff, watching nervously as the human shuttle approached. The small craft was as angular and aggressive-looking as their warships, built for function rather than the aesthetic beauty that Federation species preferred. Sir, whispered Security Chief Nalvin, should we have weapons ready? The young Etherian looked embarrassed even asking the question. Federation ships carried tools for cutting through debris and emergency situations, but nothing that could be called a real weapon. No, Captain Cilandros replied quietly. If they wanted to harm us, they wouldn't need to come aboard. Remember, we're surrounded by their fleet. The shuttle landed with mechanical precision. As the airlock cycled, the Federation crew could hear heavy footsteps approaching. When the inner door opened, Captain Elena Vasquez stepped through, followed by 6 human Marines in full combat armor. The effect on the Federation crew was immediate and overwhelming. The humans moved with controlled aggression, their eyes constantly scanning for threats. Even their leader, Captain Vasquez, had her hand resting casually near a weapon on her belt. They were clearly relaxed, but it was the relaxation of predators who were confident in their ability to handle any situation. Captain Vasquez herself was not what the Federation officers had expected. She was average height for a human, with dark hair pulled back in a practical style. Her uniform was simple but clearly military in design. What struck the Federation crew most was her eyes. They were intelligent, alert, and completely unafraid. Captain Cilandros, she said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. I know this situation is unusual, by your standards. Captain Cilandros carefully took her hand, noting how firm her grip was. Captain Vasquez, I must admit that your introduction methods are unlike anything in Federation experience. We're peaceful beings. The concept of deception for first contact is difficult for us to understand. Vasquez nodded. I understand that, Captain. But you have to realize, from our perspective, your peaceful nature is just as difficult to understand. On Earth, every species uses camouflage, misdirection, and tactical planning for survival. It's not aggression, it's intelligence. She gestured to her Marines. These men and women aren't here to threaten you. They're here because humans have learned that being prepared for trouble is the best way to avoid it. We call it hoping for the best, preparing for the worst. Science Officer Temrell stepped forward, her curiosity overcoming her fear. Captain Vasquez, our records show your planet as uninhabitable. How did your species not only survive but develop space travel? Vasquez smiled, and the Federation crew was surprised to see genuine warmth in the expression. Our planet tried to kill us every day, Officer Temral. Predators, diseases, natural disasters, climate changes. Everything was a threat. But that taught us to adapt, to innovate, to never give up. What you saw as an uninhabitable death world we saw as home. It made us tough. But surely, Captain Cilandro said, such a harsh environment would make a species violent and aggressive. It made us capable of violence when necessary, Vasquez corrected. There's a difference. We learned to fight because we had to. But we also learned to cooperate, to build communities, to take care of each other. You can't survive on a death world alone. She walked to the viewport, looking out at the human fleet surrounding them. Captain, I want to be direct with you. We know about the Federation's expansion plans. We know that Earth is scheduled for observation and evaluation next year. We know that your standard procedure is to watch a new species for decades or centuries before considering contact. The Federation officers exchanged nervous glances. Their expansion protocols were not supposed to be public knowledge. How do you know this? Captain Cilandros asked. We've been monitoring your communications since we developed faster-than-light travel 8 months ago. Your diplomatic frequencies aren't encrypted against species that aren't supposed to exist yet. Vasquez turned back to face them. We also know that the Federation has strict rules about contact with dangerous species. The quarantine protocols exist for good reasons, Captain Cilandros said carefully. They protect peaceful species from those who might harm them. And they protect peaceful species from learning anything that might disturb their worldview, Vasquez replied. Captain, how many quarantine zones are there? 17 currently active zones, Science Officer Temral answered automatically, then looked surprised that she'd revealed the information. 17 death world species that the Federation is too afraid to contact, Vasquez said. How many of them have developed space travel? How many of them are watching you right now, deciding whether you're worth talking to? The implications hit the Federation crew like a physical blow. They'd always assumed they were the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. The idea that there might be other species, possibly more advanced species, that they were ignoring out of fear was terrifying. What do you want from us? Captain Cilandros asked directly. Partnership, Vasquez replied immediately. Earth wants full membership in the Galactic Federation. We want access to your trade networks, your scientific databases, your exploration programs. We want to be part of the galactic community. Federation membership requires centuries of evaluation, Captain Cilandros protested. There are protocols, procedures, safeguards. Those protocols were designed for species that you discovered, Vasquez interrupted. We discovered you. That changes the situation significantly. One of the human Marines stepped forward and whispered something to Captain Vasquez. She nodded and held up a hand to the Federation officers. Gentlemen, we're receiving an emergency transmission from Federation space. You might want to hear this. She activated a communication device, and the bridge filled with a panicked voice speaking in the standard Federation emergency frequency. All Federation vessels. This is Colony Administrator Veltar of Kepler's Paradise. We are under attack by Zarketh hive mind forces. They have 3 bioships in orbit and are deploying ground forces. Our defense platforms have been destroyed. We need immediate military assistance. The transmission continued with increasingly desperate reports from 3 different Federation colonies. The Zarketh, a hostile species from beyond Federation space, had launched a coordinated attack on the outer colonies. Federation Command was ordering all civilian vessels to withdraw immediately and wait for the defense fleet to respond. How long until your defense fleet can reach those colonies? Vasquez asked. Captain Cilandros checked his datapad with shaking hands. 4 days minimum. The defense fleet was conducting exercises in the core systems. How many people live on those colonies? Kepler's Paradise has 2 million inhabitants. New Harmony has 1.8 million. Peaceful Haven has 3 million people. Vasquez was quiet for a moment, calculating. So nearly 7 million civilians will be under attack for 4 days before help arrives. Our evacuation protocols, Captain Cilandros began, won't work against a coordinated military assault, Vasquez finished. Captain, I'm going to make you an offer that's never been made in galactic history. The Earth Defense Fleet will respond to this emergency immediately. The Federation officers stared at her in shock. You would help us, even though we've never helped you? Captain, Vasquez said seriously, There are 7 million innocent people in danger. We don't need a treaty or a membership agreement to know what's right. That's what neighbors do. They help each other when trouble comes. She activated her communication device. Admiral Chen, this is Captain Vasquez. We have a priority humanitarian crisis in Federation space. 3 colonies under attack by hostile forces. Defense fleet is 4 days out. The reply came immediately. Understood, Captain. How many ships do we need? All of them, sir. We're going to show the galaxy what humans do when civilians are in danger. Captain Silandros felt something he'd never experienced before. A mixture of hope and terror. The humans were offering to fight a war for people they'd never met, to save colonies of species they'd just encountered, but they were also about to demonstrate human military capabilities against an enemy that had terrorized the Federation for years. Captain Vasquez, he said quietly, the Zarketh are incredibly dangerous. They've been raiding Federation colonies for decades. Our own military has never been able to defeat them. Vasquez smiled, and this time the expression was not entirely friendly. Captain, the Zarketh evolved on a world with multiple suns and low gravity. They're used to easy living and overwhelming their enemies with numbers. She gestured toward the human fleet visible through the viewport. We evolved on a world that tried to kill us every single day. We're used to being outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting for our lives. Her voice became deadly serious. The Zarketh are about to learn the difference between a species that fights for conquest and a species that fights for survival. The human fleet moved like a single deadly organism. Captain Sil Andros watched from the bridge of the Harmony's dawn as 47 warships shifted from their ambush formation into a battle formation with terrifying efficiency. Each ship knew exactly where to go, exactly when to move, and exactly what their role would be in the coming fight. Jump coordinates locked in, announced Captain Vasquez over the fleet communication channel. All ships report ready for combat operations. Captain Silandros had insisted that the 3 Federation vessels accompany the human fleet to observe and provide humanitarian aid. Now watching the humans prepare for war, he was beginning to understand just how different these beings were from any species the Federation had ever encountered. Captain Vasquez, he said over the communication link, our sensors show the Zarketh have bioships that are larger than your vessels. They also have regenerative capabilities that make them very difficult to destroy. We've studied your encounter reports, Captain, Vasquez replied. We know what we're facing. The Zarketh rely on their size, their regeneration, and their ability to overwhelm enemies with numbers. They're used to fighting Federation ships that try to avoid casualties at all costs. Her voice became colder. They've never fought a species that's willing to trade casualties to achieve objectives. The human fleet jumped to faster-than-light travel, and the Federation ships followed. The journey to Kepler's paradise took 6 hours, time that the humans used to plan their attack with methodical precision. Captain Silandros was given access to their tactical planning sessions, and what he heard changed his understanding of warfare forever. The humans didn't just plan to drive off the Zarketh. They planned to destroy them so completely that the hive mind would never again consider the Federation colonies as targets. They studied the enemy ship's weaknesses, calculated optimal attack patterns, and prepared contingency plans for every possible scenario. The Zarketh bioships are tough, explained Admiral Chen during the briefing, but they have one critical weakness. Their regenerative systems require massive amounts of energy. If we can force them to regenerate faster than they can produce power, their systems will overload. How do we do that? Asked Captain Morrison of the UNSC Retribution. Coordinated strikes from multiple directions. We don't try to punch through their armor. We make them heal constantly until their power systems burn out. Captain Silandros listened with growing amazement. The Federation's standard tactic against Zarketh ships was to run away. The humans were planning to kill them. When the fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at Kepler's paradise, the scope of the crisis became clear. 3 massive Zarketh bioships hung in orbit around the colony world, each one larger than any Federation vessel. Smaller biofighters swarmed between them like insects. On the planet's surface, Zarketh ground forces were attacking the major cities. Sir, reported Lieutenant Commander Park from the sensor station, I'm reading approximately 2 million colonists still on the surface. Their evacuation ships are being destroyed as they try to launch. Admiral Chen's voice was calm and professional. All ships, this is Admiral Chen. We have civilians under direct attack. Rules of engagement are weapons-free. Repeat, weapons-free. Objective is complete destruction of all hostile forces. The human fleet spread out into 3 groups, each targeting one of the massive bioships. Captain Silandros watched in fascination as the humans used gravity wells and planetary orbits to mask their approach. They weren't just attacking, they were hunting. The first indication the Zarketh had of danger was when the human ships opened fire from 3 different directions simultaneously. Streams of energy and kinetic projectiles hammered into the bioships' hulls. But the real surprise was the humans' targeting strategy. Instead of aiming for critical systems, they were targeting regenerative nodes all across the ship's surfaces. Fascinating, whispered Science Officer Temral as she watched the battle unfold. They're not trying to deal fatal damage. They're trying to force the bioships to waste energy on healing. The Zarketh responded as they always did, by using their superior size to overwhelm their attackers. Biofighters swarmed toward the human ships, while the massive bioships began regenerating their damaged sections. But the humans had anticipated this response. As the biofighters approached, they flew into what humans called a crossfire zone, a carefully planned area where multiple human ships could target them simultaneously. The Zarketh fighters, used to overwhelming smaller Federation vessels, found themselves facing coordinated defensive fire from enemies who had positioned themselves perfectly. "This is impossible," breathed Navigator Kellen. "How did they calculate all these firing angles in advance?" "They've done this before," Captain Silandros realized. "Not against the Zarketh, but against other enemies. This isn't their first war." The bioships were learning that human weapons were different from Federation technology. Instead of energy beams that could be absorbed or deflected, the humans used kinetic projectiles, solid metal slugs fired at tremendous speeds. The bioships could regenerate from energy damage, but they couldn't regenerate mass that had been physically destroyed. Admiral Chen's voice came over the communication channel. "All ships shift to Phase 2. Target the primary bioship's power distribution network." The human fleet converged on the largest Zarketh vessel with terrifying coordination. They attacked from above, below, and both sides simultaneously, concentrating their fire on specific sections of the bioship's hull. Each strike forced the alien vessel to divert power to regeneration, weakening its weapons and shields. But the Zarketh weren't helpless. The massive bioship suddenly sprouted new weapon systems and returned fire with devastating force. 2 human ships took direct hits, their shields failing and hulls cracking. Captain Silandros expected the human fleet to withdraw and regroup. That's what Federation forces would do when facing superior firepower. Instead, the damaged ships continued their attack runs while other human vessels moved to cover them. "Captain Patterson is dead," reported one of the human ships. "I'm taking command of the Courage." "Continuing attack run." "Indomitable has lost main power," came another report. "Switching to backup systems. We're still in the fight." The Federation crew watched in shock as the humans pressed their attack despite taking casualties. When Federation ships were damaged, they retreated for repairs. When human ships were damaged, they fought harder. The first bioship's regenerative systems finally overloaded in a spectacular explosion of bioenergy. The massive vessel broke apart, its organic components dissolving into space. The Zarketh fighters that had been launched from its biobays immediately lost coordination, flying in confused circles. "One down," announced Admiral Chen. "Groups 2 and 3, you have permission to engage your targets." The second phase of the battle was even more devastating than the first. The remaining 2 bioships, seeing their companion destroyed, attempted to retreat to a higher orbit, but the humans had positioned ships to block their escape routes. Captain Vasquez's voice came over the Federation communication channel. "Captain Silandros, you might want to move your ships to a safer distance. We're about to demonstrate something called overwhelming firepower." The human fleet formed a sphere around the retreating bioships and opened fire with every weapon they had. The space between the fleets lit up with energy beams, kinetic projectiles, and missile trails. The bioship's regenerative systems, already damaged from the previous battle, couldn't keep up with the concentrated assault. In less than 20 minutes, both remaining bioships were destroyed. Their biofighters, cut off from the hive mind's coordination, were systematically hunted down and eliminated. The orbital battle was over, but the humans weren't finished. While their fleet had been fighting in space, They had also been preparing for ground operations. Assault shuttles launched from the human ships, carrying Marines to help the colonists fight off the Zarketh ground forces. Captain Selandros listened to the ground battle reports with growing amazement. The human Marines moved with the same deadly efficiency as their fleet, using tactics and equipment that the Federation had never imagined. They didn't just drive off the Zarketh ground forces. They hunted them down systematically until every invader was eliminated. All Zarketh forces neutralized, came the final report. Colonies are secure. Beginning search and rescue operations for survivors. Admiral Chen's voice was calm and professional, as if he'd just completed a routine training exercise instead of the most devastating military victory in Federation history. Fleet status report. We lost 3 ships with all hands, came the reply. 7 ships have major damage but are operational. Casualty count is 847 dead, 2,200 wounded. Captain Silandros felt sick. Nearly 2,000 humans had died in this battle. In Federation culture, such losses would be considered a tragic failure. But Admiral Chen's response surprised him. They died protecting 7 million innocent civilians, the Admiral said. That's what they volunteered for. That's what they trained for. That's what heroes do. For the first time in galactic history, the Zarketh had been completely defeated. But Captain Silandros was beginning to understand that the real change wasn't the battle they'd just witnessed. The real change was the humans themselves, a species that would sacrifice their own lives to protect strangers, that would fight impossible odds without hesitation, and that had just announced their presence to the galaxy in the most dramatic way possible. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler's Paradise, the Great Assembly Hall of the Galactic Federation buzzed with nervous energy. Representatives from hundreds of species filled the massive chamber. But all attention was focused on the newest section of seating, a block reserved for the human delegation. Admiral Elena Vasquez, now wearing the uniform of the Federation Defense Force, sat calmly in the front row of the human section. Behind her sat representatives from not just Earth, but from 6 other worlds that had been contacted since the humans proved that quarantine zones were more myth than reality. Federation High Council leader Mor Andros called the assembly to order. The ancient Etherian had led the Federation for over 2 centuries, but he'd never faced a situation like this. In 6 months, everything about galactic civilization had changed. Today we vote on Resolution 2847, he announced, his melodic voice carrying throughout the hall. The proposal to grant humanity permanent membership in the Federation Security Council and to establish the new Federation defense protocols. A murmur ran through the assembly. 6 months ago, the idea of a defense force had been unthinkable. The Federation was a peaceful organization dedicated to exploration and diplomacy. But the Zarketh crisis had changed everything. Representative Kalandros of the Veltar delegation stood to speak. Honored colleagues, I must voice my concerns about these proposals. The human military doctrine is fundamentally incompatible with Federation values. They use deception, overwhelming force, and accept casualties that we would consider catastrophic. Admiral Vasquez rose from her seat. May I respond to those concerns? High Council Leader Mor Andros nodded. The floor recognizes Admiral Vasquez of Earth. Vasquez walked to the center of the chamber, her military bearing evident in every step. Representative Kalandros raises valid points about human military doctrine. We do use deception when necessary. We do believe in overwhelming force when civilians are at risk. And yes, we accept casualties when the alternative is allowing innocents to die. She turned to address the full assembly. But let me ask you this. How many Federation civilians died in Zarketh raids over the past 50 years? Science Coordinator Yelaven checked his data pad. Approximately 400,000 across 27 raids. And how many Zarketh attacks have there been since Kepler's Paradise? The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew the answer. 0, Vasquez continued. The Zarketh haven't just stopped raiding Federation colonies. They've withdrawn their forces to their home systems and begun fortifying for defense. Intelligence reports suggest they're terrified of further human retaliation. Representative Colvin of the Quellian delegation spoke up. Admiral, your methods may be effective, but they represent a fundamental change in how the Federation operates. We've maintained peace for over 1,000 years through diplomacy and cooperation. And that's admirable, Vasquez replied. But you maintained peace by avoiding conflict, not by preventing it. You created quarantine zones instead of making contact with dangerous species. You hoped problems would go away instead of solving them. She gestured to the gallery where other newly contacted species sat. How many potential allies did you ignore because they seemed too dangerous? How many advanced civilizations did you miss because they evolved on hostile worlds? In the gallery, Captain Thrakvor of the Granite Crushers, a silicon-based species from a high-gravity world, rumbled his agreement. The massive being had been contacted by humans 3 months earlier and had immediately requested Federation membership. The humans found us when you wouldn't even try, Thrakvor announced. They didn't fear our strength, they respected it. They offered partnership where you offered isolation. High Council Leader Morandros looked troubled. Admiral Vasquez, these new contacts have proceeded very rapidly. How can we be certain that all these species are suitable for Federation membership? Because we've done something the Federation never tried, Vasquez replied. We've worked with them. The Granite Crushers are providing heavy construction services for colony worlds. The Storm Riders are sharing weather control technology. The Deep Swimmers are helping with underwater research projects. She paused to let that sink in. These species aren't dangerous to peaceful civilizations. They're valuable allies. You just had to be strong enough to approach them as equals instead of fearing them as threats. Representative Silandros of the Diplomatic Corps stood. Captain Silandros had been promoted after his first contact with humanity, and his voice carried new authority when he spoke. Admiral, I've reviewed the human integration protocols extensively. Your species has established defense fleets, training programs, and strategic partnerships across Federation space. But I have to ask, what are your long-term intentions? Are you seeking to militarize the entire Federation? Vasquez smiled, and the expression was genuinely warm. Representative Silandros, 6 months ago you risked your life to answer a distress call from strangers. You didn't hesitate to help beings you'd never met from a species you'd been taught to fear. That's the Federation ideal at its best. She turned back to the full assembly. Humans don't want to militarize the Federation. We want to protect it. There's a difference between being peaceful and being defenseless. You can maintain your values of cooperation and diplomacy, but now you'll have the strength to enforce those values when someone threatens them. High Council Leader. Morandros consulted with the other council members before speaking. Admiral, the Integration Committee has completed their review of human technology and social structures. Their report concludes that humanity represents the most significant advancement in Federation capabilities in recorded history. He paused, looking around the chamber. However, they also note that human integration has changed the fundamental nature of our civilization. We are no longer a purely peaceful organization. No, Vasquez agreed. You're something better. You're a protected peace. You're a civilization that can choose diplomacy, because you have the strength to choose war if necessary. She walked closer to the council platform. Counselor, the galaxy is bigger than Federation space. There are threats out there that make the Zarketh look like a minor annoyance. The humans found evidence of 3 other hostile species that have been watching Federation expansion, waiting for the right moment to attack. A chill ran through the assembly. The idea that other threats existed, threats worse than the Zarketh, was terrifying to species that had lived in peace for centuries. What kind of threats? Asked Security Coordinator Nalvin. Species that learned warfare the same way humans did, through necessity. Species that see the Federation's peaceful nature as weakness rather than strength. Species that have been building their forces while you've been building colonies. Vasquez activated a holographic display showing a star map. Red markers indicated hostile territories beyond Federation space. The Burning Legion controls 40 star systems and specializes in planetary invasion. The Void Hunters are nomadic raiders with technology that can disrupt faster than light travel. The Shadow Collective uses artificial intelligence to coordinate attacks across multiple sectors simultaneously. The assembly stared at the display in horrified silence. They'd spent centuries believing they lived in a peaceful galaxy, only to discover they'd been living in a small safe zone surrounded by dangers. But here's the good news, Vasquez continued. The humans aren't the only Deathworld species out there. We've made contact with 12 others, and 6 have already agreed to join what we're calling the Federation Defense Alliance. New markers appeared on the display, green ones, showing allied species with military capabilities. The Iron Hammers are expert defensive specialists. The Star Wolves are reconnaissance and fast attack experts. The shield-bearers specialize in protecting civilian populations during warfare. High Council leader Morandros studied the display with growing amazement. Admiral, you're describing a complete transformation of galactic politics. I'm describing evolution, Counselor. The Federation has grown beyond its original boundaries and original assumptions. You're no longer a small group of peaceful species exploring empty space. You're a major galactic power with responsibilities and enemies. She turned to face the full assembly one last time. The vote today isn't just about human membership in the Security Council. It's about whether the Federation chooses to grow into its new role or tries to pretend that the galaxy hasn't changed. The debate continued for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. When the final vote was tallied, Resolution 2847 passed by the largest margin in Federation history. Admiral Vasquez stood with her fellow human representatives as they were formally sworn in as the newest permanent members of the Federation Security Council. In the gallery, representatives from a dozen former quarantine zone species applauded enthusiastically. After the ceremony, Admiral Vasquez stood on the observation deck of the Federation's capital station, looking out at space through the massive transparent aluminum windows. Captain Cilandros joined her, both of them watching the mixed fleet of ships in orbit, Federation exploration vessels, human warships, and the exotic craft of newly contacted species. Admiral, Captain Cilandros said quietly, 6 months ago I was terrified of your species. Now I can't imagine facing the future without you. Vasquez smiled. Captain, 6 months ago we were strangers sending a fake distress call to trick you into an ambush. Now we're allies who fought and bled together to protect innocent lives. She gestured toward the fleet outside. That's what the best relationships are built on, not avoiding conflict but surviving it together. In the shipyards visible in the distance, new vessels were under construction. The designs combined Federation technology with human military doctrine and innovations from the other allied species. The ships were larger, more heavily armed, and bore names like Galactic Guardian, Federation's Shield, and Protector of Peace. What comes next? Captain Cilandros asked. We build something that's never existed before, Admiral Vasquez replied. A civilization that's strong enough to explore the dangerous parts of the galaxy, wise enough to make allies instead of enemies, and brave enough to fight for its values when necessary. She looked out at the stars, where human patrol ships were already venturing into unexplored regions that had been considered too dangerous for Federation vessels. We build a galaxy worth living in. Far below, in the Federation Assembly Hall, the first joint training exercise was being planned. Federation diplomats would learn basic military strategy. Human officers would study alien cultures and peaceful negotiation techniques. Representatives from dozens of species would work together to create something unprecedented in galactic history. The age of protected peace had begun.